30 Apache warriors stood in silence, bows drawn, eyes locked on a single cabin deep in the snow-covered Chiricahua Mountains. Inside, Elijah Cole waited, not with a rifle in hand, but with a prayer on his lips and a carved stone burning in his palm. 7 days earlier. The cold had settled into the bones of the mountains like an old truth, unwelcome but immovable. Elijah Cole stepped out of his crooked little cabin, snow crunching under his boots, a battered tin pail in one hand, and his breath curling like smoke into the brittle air. He wasn't looking for salvation, just firewood. The wind carried no bird song, only the hush of winter and the creaking moan of a pine that had stood too long alone. Elijah paused, eyes narrowing toward the horizon where the sun hadn't bothered to rise fully, content to slouch behind gray clouds. He tugged his coat tighter, a Union-issued wool relic from another life, and made his way toward the tree line. It was the same routine he'd followed for months now: cut wood, haul water, feed the mule, read the good book by lantern, sleep, wake, repeat. His cabin, a forgotten dot on a crooked trail just west of the Chiricahuas, hadn't seen another soul in weeks, maybe months. The last man who'd ridden this way had been a merchant with bad teeth and a sack full of rusted traps. Elijah hadn't offered coffee. The man hadn't stayed. He preferred it that way. Inside the cabin, everything remained where it ought to. The chipped enamel cup, the half-burned candle, the photo of Sarah and Bethany, now yellowed and curling at the corners, tucked into the corner of the mirror he no longer used. The mountains didn't care about grief, and Elijah had stopped explaining his silence to himself long ago. He reached the old wood pile and leaned his pail against a frozen stump. The snow was thinner here, blown clear by mountain winds, and the first logs came easy. He was reaching for a half-buried branch when he noticed it, a sharp flash of color against the white. Red. He stood still. Not just a trick of the light. Blood. Fresh, too, sharp as ink on paper. A jagged trail led from the low ridge down toward the creek bed, smeared in the way a wounded animal might drag itself. Elijah crouched, gloved fingers brushing the snow beside the crimson stains. Human. Small. The blood had pooled in drops, not splattered. A limp. He stood, squinting into the pines where the trail vanished. Every instinct said turn back, let the forest finish what it had started. But instincts had once told him to run when cannon fire took his friend's leg at Antietam, and he hadn't. Instincts had screamed when he held Bethany in her arms the night the fever took her, and he'd stayed until she was still. No, he didn't trust instincts. He followed the blood. The path wound sharply downward, cutting through brittle shrubs and icy stones. Elijah moved slowly, rifle slung but untouched, eyes scanning for whatever waited at the end of that broken trail. He found her at the base of a dead juniper, half buried in snow. She was young, maybe 18, dressed in fringed buckskin, her long black hair matted with frost and blood. Her leg was torn open from thigh to knee, flesh ragged like it had met iron or teeth. She was unconscious, barely breathing. Apache. Elijah stood over her for a long moment, every lesson the frontier had ever taught him ringing loud in his head. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his tribe. Helping her could mean death, slow or fast. It would come. But then he saw her hand, curled tight around a small leather pouch, and the necklace around her neck, a carved eagle, smoothed from years of wear. He thought of Bethany's locket, of Sarah's hands folded on a church pew, and he whispered to no one, "Lord, I don't even know what I'm doing. Lord, I don't even know what I'm doing." He knelt beside her. Elijah pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Weak pulse, cold as creekstone. He leaned in, listened. Her breath rasped shallow and thin, like wind through pine needles.
There wasn't much time. He glanced back up the slope. No movement, no sound but the whisper of snow brushing the treetops. If anyone had followed her, they were ghosts now. He slipped one arm under her shoulders, the other behind her knees. Her body was light, too light, and unresponsive, the way only fevered or dying people go limp. The old pain in his shoulder barked, but he grit his teeth and hoisted her up. She better be worth it, he muttered, more to the Lord than to her. Her head lolled against his chest, a smudge of blood seeping into his coat. It took nearly an hour to climb back to the cabin.
The snow had thickened, and Elijah's boots punched through icy drifts that bit at his calves. The girl stirred once, murmuring something soft in a language he didn't know, then fell silent again. By the time he reached the porch, his legs trembled from effort. He kicked the door open and carried her to the cot near the fire. The room smelled of wood smoke, horse sweat, and old sorrow. He stripped off her wet moccasins, unbuckled the torn leather around her thigh. The gash was deep, too deep for herbs alone, and it oozed slowly, dark and thick. Infection hadn't set in yet, but it would. Elijah set to work. He boiled snowmelt, poured whiskey over his hands, and found the last of his clean linen buried beneath old uniforms in a cedar box. The needle was bent, but it would do. He lit another candle and stitched the wound closed, whispering verses from the Psalms under his breath as he worked. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. She flinched once, a flutter of lashes, a breath held, but didn't wake. He pressed a strip of cloth over the fresh stitches and tied it tight. When he finally sat back, sweat clung to his face despite the cold. He poured what remained of the whiskey into a tin cup and drank half before dabbing the rest on her forehead. Then he built up the fire and waited. The storm outside thickened. Wind clawed at the shutters, and snow piled high against the cabin walls. Elijah watched her chest rise and fall, slow and steady. He hadn't shared a room with another soul in over 2 winters. Now here was this girl, a stranger, a symbol, a question he couldn't yet answer, bleeding in his bed. He didn't sleep. Sometime near dawn she woke. A sharp breath escaped her lips, and her hand flew to her belt, or where a belt should have been. She tried to sit, groaned, and collapsed back into the blanket. "Easy," Elijah said quietly from the chair across the room. "You move too fast, you'll undo every stitch." Her eyes found his, dark, wide, fierce, but wary. She said something in Apache, a question. Elijah raised his hands, palms up. "Don't speak your tongue. I'm not here to hurt you." She pointed toward the eastern window. Her voice trembled, but the urgency in it cut through any language. "You're trying to get home," Elijah guessed. She nodded, teeth clenched, tried to move again. Her leg failed her. He stood and crossed the room, filling a cup from the kettle and kneeling beside her. "You won't make it through the pass alone," he said, "and I can't let you freeze to death trying." She hesitated, then, with effort, reached toward her neck and unclasped the carved eagle pendant. She held it out. Elijah frowned. "What's this?" She pressed it into his palm. Her hand lingered there for a moment, not just giving, but entrusting. Then she fell back onto the pillow, eyes fluttering shut again. Elijah looked at the pendant. Eagle wings outstretched, carved from jet black stone. Warm, as if it had absorbed years of firelight, prayers, and grief. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from temperature. He closed his fingers around it, feeling the weight. Whatever it was, it meant something. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. Elijah Cole hadn't let another soul inside his cabin in almost 2 years. Now there was a stranger in his bed, a wounded Apache girl wrapped in wool blankets, her breath shallow and uncertain.
The fire crackled low, casting shifting shadows across the room, flickering against the rifle mounted above the door, and the Bible resting open on the table beside it. He sat in the old rocking chair, boots planted firm, watching her. A dented kettle hissed gently on the stove, steam rising in pale ribbons. He'd cleaned the wound as best he could, stitched her up with thread he hadn't touched since Sarah passed. His fingers had trembled more than he'd like to admit. She hadn't woken again since pressing that eagle pendant into his palm. He still held it. The carved stone was smooth, feathered wings spread in flight. Not a trinket, not a gift, something older. It pulsed faint warmth into his skin, like embers that refused to die. Elijah turned it over once more, then slipped it into his coat pocket and stood. He crossed the room in silence, dipped a rag into warm water, and gently pressed it to her forehead. Her brow twitched. She shifted, a whisper of movement beneath the blanket. Her lips parted, and a single breath escaped, almost a sigh, almost a word. He leaned closer. She whispered again, soft, melodic, a language he didn't speak. He didn't need to.
"Easy now," he said, dipping the cloth again. "You're safe here." Her eyelids fluttered, opened halfway. Her gaze met his, sharp, black, assessing. A flicker of fear passed between them. She reached instinctively for her belt, or where one should have been. Elijah stepped back and raised both hands slowly, palms up. "I didn't take your blade," he said, "didn't need it." She blinked, then glanced around the cabin, taking in the shadows, the fire, the steaming cup beside her bed. "I'm not your enemy," he added gently. She didn't answer, just stared. Alert now, awake in full, but not speaking. He handed her the cup of broth. Her fingers trembled as she took it. The heat made her flinch, then cling. She drank slowly, never taking her eyes off him. Elijah moved back to the rocking chair, sat. The fire snapped once, sending a spray of sparks upward. Wind howled beyond the walls, rattling the shutters. Another storm was coming. He could feel it in his joints. The girl finished the broth and held the cup loosely in her lap. Then she lifted her hand, pointed toward the window, east, into the mountains. "You want to go home," Elijah said. She nodded once. He studied her a long moment.
"You can't walk, not with that leg, and it's 2 days through Bad Pass." She didn't look away, didn't plead, just waited. He let out a breath and rubbed his temples. "Lord, you sure do pick strange times to test a man." When he looked back at her, she was trying to sit upright. Her face twisted in pain, but she didn't cry out. She was trying to prove something, or maybe she simply didn't know how to ask. Elijah stood slowly. "I've got a mule, a sled, and enough dried meat for 2 days if we stretch it," he said. "But if the snow deepens, we'll freeze halfway through." She stared at him, steady, silent. He exhaled again, not from doubt, but from knowing what this meant, what it might cost. "We go together," he said finally, "or not at all." She closed her eyes, just for a second, and nodded. By midday, Elijah had the sled ready. It wasn't much, just a hand-built frame lashed with old leather and bolted to 2 curved iron runners he'd salvaged from a mining cart the year before. But it would hold her weight, barely, if the mule didn't spook on the ridgeline. He wrapped Ayanna in every blanket he had, along with Sarah's old quilt, faded red and cream, hand-stitched in another life. The color looked strange against the girl's buckskin clothes and dusky skin, but somehow fitting, like history looping back on itself. She made no sound as he lifted her from the cot. Just a quiet gasp as the cold hit her, then silence again, jaw clenched. Her eyes never left his face, but she didn't flinch from his hands. That mattered more than she knew. The first 100 yards down the trail were easy, pine-shaded and firm with packed snow. But as they rounded the slope near Devil's Elbow, the wind caught them full force, icy and relentless. The mule brayed once, shook its head, but kept going. Old as it was, it still remembered war. Ayanna huddled in the sled, her hands clutched over her stomach. Elijah kept a slow pace, eyes flicking between trail and sky. He hadn't seen clouds like this in a year, not since the blizzard that took the Harlan boys 3 ridges over. They made camp in a hollow near dusk. No fire, too much risk of being seen. Instead, he pitched a lean-to with snow-packed walls and laid Ayanna inside on a bed of pine boughs. She was awake now, feverish but coherent. He handed her water. She drank. Then she pointed at the pendant around his neck, the eagle stone she'd given him. Her voice was faint, cracked with cold and thirst, but insistent. "Elikai." Elijah frowned. "What?" She touched her heart, then his chest. "Elikai." He didn't know the word, but something in her eyes, her tone, it wasn't just a name. It was a role, a duty. He reached up, touched the stone. It pulsed warm against his fingertips. "Is that what I am now?" he asked softly. "Elikai?" She nodded. Then, through chapped lips, she murmured a string of syllables, words he didn't know, couldn't understand. But one echoed through the dark. Kos. It meant nothing to him, but it made her weep. Elijah looked away, gave her the dignity of tears in peace. The wind howled overhead, shaking snow loose from the lean-to roof. He checked the mule, double-knotted the reins, then returned to where Ayanna lay beneath the quilt. She was already asleep. He sat just outside the shelter, knees drawn up, rifle across his lap. He didn't light the lantern, didn't need it. The stars were out now, blazing cold and sharp as old regrets. Behind the darkness of trees, mountains loomed like waiting verdicts. By morning, Ayanna's fever had worsened. Her skin burned under Elijah's hand, and her breath came shallow, rapid. He touched the bandage on her thigh. The wound was swollen, angry red around the stitches. Infection had found her. Elijah stood, walked a few yards uphill, and scraped a handful of snow into his canteen. He boiled it in a battered tin pot, dropped in the last of his willow bark, and stirred it until it turned the color of copper. Not much, but it might ease the pain. She drank it without protest, eyes dull and distant. "We've got to keep moving," Elijah said, mostly to himself. "If we stop here, you won't last another night." He broke camp in silence. Snow had crusted over during the night, making the sled drag heavier, but the mule pressed forward. Each mile grew harder. The slope steepened, rocks jutting through the powder like bones from a shallow grave. Ayanna drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes she murmured things, short, breathless phrases in Apache. Elijah listened, not understanding the words, but hearing their shape. They weren't prayers. They sounded like warnings. Just past midday, the wind shifted. Elijah paused, cocked his head. A faint sound, not wind, not bird, echoed through the ravine below. Hoofbeats. He crouched behind a ridge of snow-crusted boulders and scanned the valley. Far off, almost hidden beneath the trees, he caught the movement of horses. Riders, 3, maybe 4. Distant, but coming fast. He turned back to Ayanna. She was watching him, barely able to lift her head. "Friends of yours?" he asked grimly. She blinked, once, slow. Then she shook her head. "Enemy?" he pressed. She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. Elijah swore under his breath. Whoever they were tracking, and they weren't far behind. He packed snow over the sled's runners to mask their trail, and pulled a pine branch behind him to blur the drag marks. Every trick he knew from years of war and wilderness. Ayanna tried to rise, teeth clenched, hand gripping the side of the sled. "Don't," he said, "you'll bleed again." But she pointed, weak, insistent, toward the eagle stone. Elijah touched it, confused. "What about it?" She gripped his wrist, whispered, "They want it." A chill deeper than the mountain wind ran through him. Not her. Not revenge. Not just sacred ground, they were hunting the stone. He looked down at the pendant, black, polished, etched with marks he didn't understand, something ancient, something powerful. "You shouldn't have given this to me," he said quietly. But Ayanna only closed her eyes again, lips trembling with fever. And Elijah knew she hadn't given it out of gratitude. She'd passed a burden, a legacy. He stared across the pass, toward the ridgeline that marked tribal territory. Still half a day away, maybe more in this snow. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew louder. He took up the reins, checked the sled, and whispered to the mule, "Move." They pushed on. The sun was a dull smear behind clouds when Elijah saw the first sign of the boundary. A tall stone totem, half buried in snow, stood like a sentinel beside the trail. Carved long ago, smoothed by wind and rain, marked with symbols Elijah couldn't read, but instinctively respected. A hawk in flight, a serpent coiled in defense, and a hand, open, palm up, not in surrender, but in offering. Ayanna stirred as they passed it. Her eyes opened. She looked at the stone, then back at Elijah. A flicker of something, relief perhaps, ghosted across her face before she fell back into the blankets. They were close. The landscape shifted as they descended. Pine gave way to juniper, and the snow thinned under sparse canopy. Elijah knew they were passing into land few settlers dared enter. It wasn't mapped, and it wasn't welcome. But he pressed on. Near a bend in the trail, Ayanna suddenly gripped the sled's edge and tried to rise. "Hey," Elijah said, rushing back. "Stop! You'll reopen the—" She was pointing ahead. Two figures stood among the trees, not riders, watchers. They didn't move, didn't speak, faces painted with soot and ash, cloaked in hides that blended into bark and shadow. One held a spear, the other a bow. Elijah raised his hand slowly. "I'm bringing her back," he said. "She's hurt. I'm not here to fight." The two warriors said nothing. Then, wordlessly, they stepped back, into the woods, vanishing like smoke. Ayanna slumped with exhaustion. Her part was done. Elijah followed the curve of the path until they reached a clearing. A small stream ran nearby, partially thawed, and behind it, nestled into the trees, stood a structure, not quite a home, more like a ceremonial lodge. Smoke drifted from its chimney. Before Elijah could call out, Ayanna moved. Slowly, shakily, she pushed the blanket off her shoulders and forced herself to sit upright in the sled. Elijah moved to help, but she raised a hand, steady, commanding. She stood on one leg, trembling, her wound beginning to darken the buckskin beneath her. But she didn't fall. She stepped forward 3 paces and turned to him. Then she reached for the eagle stone still hanging from his neck. He offered it, thinking she meant to take it back. But instead, she pressed it firmly into his palm again, not reclaiming, but affirming. Her eyes locked on his, and for the first time since he found her in the snow, she smiled. A small, tired smile. The kind only shared between people who understand something without saying it aloud. Then she turned, limping toward the smoke and shadow of her people. Elijah didn't follow. He watched her disappear into the lodge, 2 more figures emerging to receive her. A woman wrapped in layered shawls. A man with braided gray hair and a flint knife at his belt. Neither looked toward Elijah. He stood alone in the snow, the eagle stone in his palm, heavier now somehow, like it carried more than just weight. Elijah didn't wait to be invited. He turned the mule toward the trail and started the long walk back up the mountain. He was almost home when the quiet shattered. Hoofprints, fresh, dozens. And on the tree outside his cabin, a symbol carved deep into the bark. 3 parallel lines crossed by an arrow. Someone had come. Someone who had followed him home. Elijah froze at the edge of the clearing. His cabin sat where he left it, still, silent, half buried in snow. But the trail leading to it was trampled, the kind of mess made by many horses standing still for a long time. He counted the imprints, more than a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. Hooves, moccasins, even bare footprints in the thin layer of frost. They hadn't come to steal, they'd come to wait. A warning surged through his chest like a second heartbeat. He unslung his rifle, didn't chamber around. No need to provoke ghosts. He walked in slow, careful circles around the cabin, boots crunching softly. Every few steps he stopped and listened. Nothing. But something was off. The snow around the cabin had been disturbed deliberately. His lean-to woodpile had been disassembled, then reassembled sloppily. The cooking pot, usually hanging just so over the fire, now rested inside, sideways, still clean. His collection of river stones, lined along the window for weather signs, had been moved, one of them missing. He stepped onto the porch. The door creaked the way it always did, but Elijah hesitated before entering. He knew his own space like a blind man knew his breath. If something had changed, he'd feel it. Inside, everything was almost the same. The rocking chair had been nudged 2 inches to the left. His Bible, normally placed precisely at the end of the table, now lay centered. The photograph of Sarah and Bethany tilted ever so slightly in its frame. They weren't thieves, they weren't vandals, they were searching. He closed the door quietly, crossed the room, and knelt by the hearth. There, beneath the loose floorboard he hadn't opened in months, lay a cracked tin box. Inside it, $2 silver and a letter from his wife he still couldn't bring himself to finish reading, untouched, which meant they hadn't been after money. Elijah leaned against the wall, breathing slow. He reached for the eagle stone, drawing it from beneath his coat, still warm. He turned it over, thumb tracing the markings. This wasn't a charm. It was a message, a beacon. And someone had come looking. He stepped outside just as the wind shifted again. A branch snapped, not fallen, broken, deliberate, measured. He turned toward the sound. 3 riders stood among the trees at the edge of the clearing, mounted, motionless, half shrouded in mist. Their faces bore war paint, streaked with ash and ochre. Feathers twisted into their braids, and the silence between them wasn't emptiness, it was waiting. They knew he saw them. One rider raised his arm, palm open, a signal. Behind the cabin he heard horses stir. More than 3, maybe 10, maybe all of them. They'd surrounded him again. Elijah didn't move, just stood there, hand resting on the eagle stone. The central rider dismounted, walked forward, not fast, not slow. Every step purposeful, like a man used to others fearing his approach. He stopped 5 feet away. "I am Takakota," he said in accented English, voice low, hoarse from age and command. "Ayana is my daughter." Elijah nodded once. Takakota's eyes didn't blink. "You carried her across the killing pass. You risked your life when you could have left her to the wolves." "I didn't do it for praise," Elijah said. "No," Takakota replied. "You did it for something you lost." That landed harder than expected. The chief looked past Elijah, toward the cabin. "But now we must speak of what you carry." Elijah said nothing. Takakota stepped closer, pointing to the stone. "You have something that belongs to our people." And Elijah realized this wasn't a visit of thanks, it was judgment. Elijah didn't move. Takakota stood close now, closer than any man had in months, his breath visible in the cold, his eyes unreadable. Warriors emerged from the trees like shadows made flesh. 30 in all, some on horseback, others crouched low with bows strung and spears balanced in hand. The clearing had become a trap.
"You followed me," Elijah said calmly, "back from the mountains." "We never stopped watching," Takakota replied. "Not when our blood is missing, not when sacred ground is stained." Elijah nodded slowly. "And now you're here for the stone?" "It is not a stone," the chief said. "It is a covenant." He reached into his own deerskin pouch and withdrew a matching talisman, older, darker, cracked along the edge. "Each is carved from the heart of the same mountain, given only to those trusted to carry the burden. Ayanna gave it to you. She would have died without help." "Many have died without help," Takakota replied. "Yet she chose to give you more than thanks. She named you part of us. That has meaning." The warriors didn't speak, but Elijah could feel their judgment pressing in, thick as the snow-laden air. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The chief looked toward the forest, the low valley beyond. "3 men came through our lands," he said. "Settlers, armed. They ignored our warnings. They camped on burial hills. When Ayanna confronted them, they shot her and rode west." Elijah felt something twist in his gut. "They passed your trail," Takakota continued.
"Their tracks led here. We believed you were with them. I'm not. Ayanna said the same." That at least brought a flicker of relief. "But now we have a deeper problem," the chief said. "The men who hurt her, they carry rifles marked with federal brass. One belonged to a lawman. They have vanished, and the soldiers will come asking why." Elijah knew where this was going. "If they find dead settlers on Apache land," he said, "they won't ask questions." Takakota's eyes were flint. "They will answer with bullets." The wind shifted again. Somewhere in the trees, a horse snorted. "We don't want war," Takakota said, "but we will not hide our dead. And we will not let those who spill our blood vanish like ghosts." Elijah looked down at the stone in his hand. It felt heavier now, the weight of it sinking into his bones. Not just a symbol, a responsibility. Takakota stepped back, letting space settle between them again. "You saved my daughter's life," he said. "Now you must decide if that was just a moment, or the beginning of something greater." The warriors stood still, but the air crackled with decision. Elijah could feel it, a pivot in time, one of those rare moments where nothing yet had happened, but everything already had. He looked up at the sky. Snow was falling again, gentle and soft, too soft for what hung in the air. He closed his fingers around the stone and nodded. "I'll help." Takakota bowed his head once, not low, but enough, respect without surrender. "You walk with us now," he said. Then from the valley below, a sound cracked the quiet like a lightning strike. Gunfire. Not warning shots. Battle. The warriors moved at once, silent, swift, mounting their horses, vanishing into the trees. Takakota remained just long enough to say one final thing. "Whatever happens next, it will be written in fire and blood." And then he was gone. Elijah stood alone in the clearing, the eagle stone still burning in his hand. If you found yourself drawn into this story, a like and a comment would mean a lot. The fire crackled low between them, casting long shadows across the snow-packed earth. Takakota crouched beside it, his hands open, palms warming in silence. Elijah sat across, the eagle stone lying between them on a folded scrap of red cloth, not claimed by either man, but watched by both like a coiled serpent. Above them, the stars hid behind a thick ceiling of clouds.
The night smelled of pine and distant gunpowder. Takakota didn't look up. His voice, when it came, was more breath than words. "My daughter gave you the stone." "She did," Elijah said. "She should not have." Elijah didn't answer. The silence between them stretched thin, taut as a bowstring. Takakota finally lifted his gaze. "She trusts easily, too easily, like her mother." "I didn't ask for her trust," Elijah replied, "but you kept it." The old chief leaned forward. "Do you even know what it means?" Elijah looked at the stone, the strange dark mineral, warm even in the cold, etched with symbols that meant nothing to him, yet felt heavier than iron. "Not entirely," he admitted, "but I know she gave it to me when she thought she was dying." Takakota's eyes narrowed. "That stone was carved before this land had a name in your tongue. It binds those who carry it to truth, to blood, to consequence." Elijah nodded slowly.
"Then I reckon I'm already bound." Takakota's voice turned sharp. "3 men, white men, crossed our valley days ago. Ayana followed them. She thought they were surveyors. One wore a badge." Elijah's heart sank. "Marshal Crawford?" Takakota nodded. "When she spoke to them in peace, they shot her, left her for wolves. One of them laughed." Elijah clenched his fists. "They are nearby now," the chief continued. "We tracked their trail. They are moving toward your cabin. They do not know we watch." Takakota stood, his shadow tall and cold. "You hold the stone. So now I ask, do you lead us to vengeance?" Elijah rose to his feet. "If we go now, there'll be blood in the snow. Yours, theirs, maybe mine." Takakota waited. Elijah stepped forward, picked up the stone. "Then let me speak to them first." Takakota didn't smile, but he nodded once. The first rider broke the tree line at a gallop. Snow sprayed from his horse's hooves as he leaned low in the saddle, one arm wrapped in a blood-soaked sling. Behind him, 2 others followed, one tall and thin, the other broad and twitchy, fingers drumming the stock of his repeater rifle. They didn't see Elijah at first. They were running from something or toward it. They didn't realize they were riding into a circle of 30 silent warriors. Takota didn't move, neither did his men. They waited, still as pine trunks, breath ghosting upward, bows half raised, ready. Elijah stepped forward just as the first horse stumbled to a halt at the edge of the clearing. The man yanked on the reins and cursed. "What in—" The second rider spotted Elijah and drew his rifle, eyes wild. "Don't," Elijah said quietly. They froze, just long enough. Takota's warriors didn't need commands. Arrows hummed to half-draw, spears shifted. Death crouched, invisible but imminent. The third man, the big one, spat in the snow. "Ain't this a party?" he said. His voice was gravel-soaked in whiskey. "You the preacher or the executioner?" Elijah ignored the jab. He looked at their horses, their boots, blood on the saddle horn, dried mud on a badge that wasn't theirs. "You boys crossed a line you shouldn't have," Elijah said. The thin one sneered. "She was snooping." "She was unarmed," Elijah replied. The broad man took a step forward. "You planning to try something, old man?" "No."
"I'm planning to stop something." He gestured behind him to the shadows beneath the trees. "You're surrounded. 30 Apache warriors. You shoot me, you won't finish the draw before you're a pincushion." The tall one shifted. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Elijah continued, "There's still a choice here, but it ends now. You lower your weapons, you walk out of here breathing." The broad man's face twisted in mock surprise. "Oh, so you're in charge now, mountain man. You ain't the law." "No," Elijah said, "but I speak for the people who spared your miserable life the first time." The snow muffled everything but their breathing. Then the twitchy one, thin, young, slowly lowered his rifle. The other hesitated. Dakota gave no signal, not yet. Elijah didn't blink. He stood like stone in the middle of the clearing, arms loose at his sides, the eagle stone hidden beneath his coat, resting against his heart. The wind tugged gently at the hem of his coat, but nothing else moved. The young outlaw had lowered his rifle. The tall, wiry one still held his, and the big man, the dangerous one, smiled like a wolf.
"Well," the brute said, "look who thinks he's Solomon." Elijah didn't respond. Behind him, the forest whispered with the breath of 30 warriors who needed no orders, only excuse. "You're standing between justice and a graveyard, mister," Elijah said evenly. "You raise that gun another inch, you'll die before your boot hits the snow." The big man's grin faded. "I've seen war," Elijah said, voice lower now. "Seen what men do when they think they can't be touched. And I've buried more than one friend who thought his pride mattered more than mercy." His eyes locked on the tall man. "You carry a badge?" The wiry one hesitated. "It belonged to Marshal Crawford." Elijah's chest tightened. "Where is he?" No one answered. The young one looked away. His shoulders sank just a little. Elijah pressed. "You killed a federal officer. You don't just have blood on your hands, you've got the cavalry on your trail." That landed. The tall man swore under his breath. Elijah stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "I'm giving you one chance. Drop your weapons. Let them take you. There's still breath left in you. That's more than you gave the girl in the snow." Silence stretched. Then a click. The big man cocked his revolver. Elijah didn't move. The tomahawk struck before the gun cleared leather. A blur of shadow from the tree line, a low whistle, and the hatchet buried itself in the man's temple with a sound like splitting kindling. He collapsed sideways into the snow, dead before his body hit the ground. The other two froze. Elijah didn't flinch. "You want to follow him?" he asked. The tall one dropped his gun. So did the younger. Warriors closed in like the forest itself had come alive, swift, silent, absolute. The men were bound, disarmed, and dragged into the darkness without a word. Elijah stood alone again, breathing heavy, the tomahawk still humming in the air. Behind him, Dakota stepped forward. "You did not stop him," the chief said. "I didn't have to," Elijah replied. "You already had men in place." Dakota studied him. "And still you stood there." "I had to." The chief nodded once. Then they both turned, because from the saddlebag of the captured horse, something fell. A military map, blood-stained, and a letter sealed with the crest of the Union Army. Elijah knelt and picked up the letter. The seal was broken, but the paper inside remained intact, folded with military precision. He opened it beneath the pale light of a torch held by one of Dakota's men. Dakota read over his shoulder. To Captain Roland P. Gaines. Subject: Securing indigenous territory for mineral prospecting. Directive: Displace with discretion. Official presence unauthorized. Operatives classified as external assets. Elijah's stomach turned. He looked up at the men now tied and kneeling in the snow. You weren't just running from justice. You were the plan.
The younger one looked away. The tall man muttered, "We just followed orders." Takakota's eyes narrowed, jaw set hard. They used the badge to hide their crimes. Elijah stood, holding the letter for all to see. If word of this gets out, if the army knows 3 of their external assets died on Apache ground, they won't send apologies, they'll send troops. A heavy silence fell. Elijah turned to Takakota. What happens next determines everything. Takakota crossed his arms. We bury them. Let the land eat the evidence. No, Elijah shook his head. If they vanish without trace, the army will investigate harder. They'll come looking. Then what do you propose? The chief asked, his voice edged with steel. Elijah paused. Then he lifted the eagle stone, held it between them. We send them back, all 3, but not with wounds, not with signs of battle. Takakota frowned. We stage it, Elijah continued. Horse accident, avalanche, something clean. The letter, we burn it. We erase the truth to protect what matters. Takakota looked at him long and slow. And if the truth rises later? Elijah met his gaze. Then I'll answer for it. The stone warmed in his palm. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. For the Apache, for Ayanna, for every soul still breathing on land that refused to forget its dead. Takakota turned to his warriors. A silent moment passed between them. Then he gave a single nod. We do it at dawn, he said. The body still twitched in the snow. Blood pooled beneath the big man's head, turning white into crimson, steaming in the frigid air. The tomahawk remained buried in his skull, a brutal punctuation mark on a choice made too late. Elijah stared for a beat longer, then turned away. The 2 survivors knelt, tied and shivering. The tall one kept glancing toward the dead man, jaw clenched. The younger just stared at the ground, lips moving silently. Prayer or panic, Elijah couldn't tell. Takakota stood behind them, arms folded, the firelight glinting off the blade of another tomahawk held loosely at his side. We wait until first light, the chief said. Then we carry out your plan. Elijah nodded. He glanced around the perimeter. The warriors were already moving, quiet as snowfall, working in pairs to gather branches, stamp out footprints, prepare the scene. They didn't ask questions. They trusted the word of their leader, and now Elijah's. But trust was fragile, hard-won, and easy to break. Elijah stepped back to the corpse. He knelt, grunted softly, and with effort pulled the tomahawk free. A sickening squelch followed. He wiped the blade clean with a scrap of hide, then walked to Takakota. The chief took it without comment. You could have let him shoot, Takakota said. Elijah looked out toward the dark hills. I thought about it. But you didn't move. No. Why? Elijah shrugged. Maybe I needed to know someone else would stand up. Just once. Takakota studied him for a long moment. Then, to Elijah's surprise, he gave a small, grim smile. You are not what you seem. Neither are you, Elijah replied. Snow began to fall again, soft, steady flakes drifting down like ashes. The forest hushed. One of the warriors returned with the saddlebag that had fallen earlier. He handed it to Elijah, then withdrew. Elijah opened the flap. Inside was more than a map. A black notebook, names, coordinates, sketches of terrain, and a photograph. Ayanna, sitting beside an old woman, hair braided with river shells, both of them caught mid-laugh. Taken from a distance, not recently. They'd been watching her for a long time. Elijah's hands tightened. He handed the photo to Takakota. The chief's expression didn't change, but his grip on the tomahawk turned white-knuckled. "This wasn't a mistake," Elijah said. "This was a hunt." Takakota didn't speak. He didn't need to. The trees answered for him, with silence sharp as a scream. Dawn came slow, gray and heavy. Elijah stood at the edge of the clearing, breath misting in the air, watching the sun smear pale gold across the peaks. The storm had passed, but the cold lingered, sharp, cleansing, like a blade pressed to the skin.
Behind him, Takakota's warriors moved with quiet precision. They'd cleaned the saddlebag, removed the letters and map, and buried the evidence beneath a cedar marked with stone. The bodies, all three now, were draped over their horses, heads covered, wounds hidden. Their guns had been dismantled and scattered upstream. It would look like an accident, maybe a skirmish among thieves, maybe a fool's journey ended in frozen fate. But not murder, not justice, not truth. Elijah stared down the trail that would lead them to the nearest patrol road. He could already hear hooves in the back of his mind, questions, accusations, uniforms without eyes. And if they found the wrong detail, the entire valley would drown in fire. Takakota approached from behind. "The ground will thaw soon," he said. Elijah nodded. "You'll need to move west. We will go north." He paused. "You?" "I'll ride south," Elijah said, "to Crawford's Post, bring word, spin a tale that fits the map." Takakota raised an eyebrow. "And if they ask questions you cannot answer?" Elijah gave a tired smile. "Then I'll lie well." The chief studied him for a long moment. "You would trade your safety for ours?" "I already did," Elijah said, "when I carried her out of the snow." Takakota reached into his robe and held something out, the eagle stone, still warm. Elijah hesitated, then closed his hand around it. "You gave it to me once," he said, "for a reason." "She gave it," Takakota corrected, "and she saw something I did not. I was just a man in a cabin." "No," the chief shook his head. "You were a man who stayed when it would have been easier to walk away." They stood in silence as the wind rose. Elijah finally stepped toward his horse. "Tell her," he said, mounting slowly, "I'll be back before the snow melts." Takakota nodded. "She will be waiting." As Elijah rode out beneath the pine canopy, the trees whispered above, not goodbye, but go well. The eagle stone pulsed against his chest. Behind him, the past was buried. Ahead, a lie waited to be told. A lie strong enough to save lives, to hold peace in place of fire. And for the first time in years, Elijah Cole didn't feel like a man running from judgment. He felt like a man riding toward it. Your thoughts truly matter. Don't hesitate to give this story a rating. The sun was already above the pines when they finished. Elijah wiped the soot from his hands, his back aching from hours of bending over scorched branches, rearranged saddle straps, and forged footprints in the snow. Every mark had to tell the story they'd agreed on, a story that would pass under military eyes without suspicion. They dragged the horses into a gully and tilted the saddles just enough to suggest a fall. Nearby, a broken rifle lay half buried in slush, its barrel warped by fire. Takakota's warriors had arranged stones around the ashes, stamped the snow to simulate a panicked retreat, and raked the edges clean, as if winter itself had begun to bury the truth. It was flawless. It had to be. The wind carried a distant echo, hooves muffled by pine needles. Elijah didn't speak. Takakota stood beside him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. His men melted into the tree line like ghosts. Minutes later, the bluecoats arrived. 5 in all, cavalry scouts from Fort Bowie.
Hardened faces, wool coats dark with frost, boots caked with trail mud. Their leader, a grizzled captain with silver whiskers and wary eyes, dismounted and took in the scene.
"Found your message at the trading post," he said. "Figured we'd find something unpleasant." Elijah nodded, handing him the false report, dated, signed, weathered. 3 men, drifters, turned on each other over stolen goods. The captain read the page, glanced around, stepped into the ruins of the scene. "Looks recent," he muttered. "It is." "Witnesses?" Elijah hesitated. "Just me." "And you didn't stop them?" He met the man's eyes. "No, I didn't have to." There was a beat of silence. Then the captain looked again at the broken rifle, at the bloodstains carefully placed along a branch, at the horse tracks leading nowhere. Finally, he folded the paper, slipped it into his coat. "Well," he said, mounting again, "savages kill for honor, whites kill for coin, but cold kills faster than both." Elijah said nothing. The captain tipped his hat. "Be careful out here, preacher." "I'm not a preacher," Elijah replied. "Could have fooled me." They rode off without another word. Only when the last echo of hoofbeats had vanished into the trees did Takakota step forward. He placed a weathered hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You have saved my people," he said. Elijah didn't answer. Not yet. Because something in his chest, not the eagle stone, but something deeper, was stirring, thawing, readying to speak again. And for once it wasn't just guilt. The smoke had long faded, but its scent lingered. Pine, ash, and something older. Elijah sat outside his cabin, the same rough bench where he'd once stared into a winter he didn't care to survive. Now spring peeked at the corners of the world. Snow melted slower here, but it melted still. Ayanna sat nearby, her leg healed, dark hair braided with shell and bone. She was whittling a small figure out of cedar, slow, careful strokes. She hadn't spoken in hours. She didn't need to. Elijah reached into his coat pocket. The eagle stone was still there, smooth, warm, like it had been shaped by fire instead of time. A soft sound, footfalls behind him. Takakota approached, wrapped in a wolf pelt cloak, flanked by 2 of his men. He stopped just short of the porch. "There is space," he said, "in the winter lodge. My brother's tent is empty now. It should not stay that way." Elijah looked out at the trees. He'd lived alone so long, even the thought of shared firelight felt like a stranger's voice in his mind.
But he'd made a promise, not with words, but with the choice to stay. And promises in this land were sacred. "I'll come," he said. Takakota gave a single nod, then turned away. Ayanna smiled faintly, just once, then continued carving. That night they walked down the ridge together. It was a short journey, but to Elijah it felt longer than the war, longer than the winters he'd tried to drink into silence. The Apache camp was quiet but alive. Smoke curled from conical roofs. Children's laughter flared and faded like sparks. Somewhere a flute played, off-key, human. He was welcomed with few words, but many eyes. Ayanna stayed by his side. Later, beside the fire, she spoke, not to him, but to the children gathered close. She was small, Ayanna said, holding up the carving, a little girl with braids. She fell in the snow. And someone found her. Not a warrior, not a chief. A man with no tribe. A man who walked alone. Elijah listened, face lit by flame, the eagle stone still pressed close to his hearth. But he did not walk away, Ayanna said. He stayed. And that, she added softly, is how the fire stayed lit, even when the world went cold. The children stared wide-eyed. One leaned close to Elijah. "Was that man you?" He smiled. "No," he said. "That man was someone I used to be." They laughed, not understanding. But Ayanna did.
So did Takakota, standing in the shadows, watching not just a man who changed, but a soul returned from exile. And as the fire crackled and the night wrapped its cloak around them, Elijah Cole sat among family, no longer alone, no longer lost, and finally at peace. If this story stirred something in you, follow true Wild West stories, where every campfire spark, worn saddle, and silent glance echoes a time when grit met grace. These are not just tales of the frontier, they are whispers of memory, mercy, and the quiet courage that still rides with us.